There we go. Beautiful. Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy Siska from the Chicago Justice Project. Welcome to this special edition of the Chicago Justice Show. Election night coverage for 2020. We all wait with bated breath to see what happens, and we're probably going to have to wait 5 days for some of the states to actually give us full returns. But joining us today is Dr. Dan Cooper, Director of Research at the Metropolitan Planning Council. I think I got all of that right. Dan, thanks so much for being with us.
You did. Good to see you, of course.
All right. So one of the reasons I really wanted you on is because I want to talk about some of the justice issues that are on the ballot here. Besides just justice issues in general that I think need to be yelled about a little more than the press is doing. But I guess first of all, let's talk about something I don't think people are going to connect to a justice issue. It looks right now from me, the graduated income tax is up 120,000 votes. That seems to be a good thing. Do you think that applies do you connect that to justice issues?
Yeah, absolutely. We knew this was going to be a tightly contested item on the ballot, and there was a ton of money dumped in to oppose it by some very wealthy interests. And so I think the extent to which it connects with justice system is this. We know the state is broke, or I shouldn't say is broke. It has a backlog of bills that are only going to grow because of the pandemic. So one way or another, we need more revenue, right? And we need this money so we can invest in things like reentry, and to depopulate prisons and jails. You don't just stop locking people up. You have to invest in the infrastructure, the support system. There's an administration that I think does care about those things and sees the need for funding for reentry services and others. But you can't do that if you don't have money in the budget for it. So yeah, I definitely connect the graduated income tax with that.
I think Illinois, Chicago, Cook County, we have a horrible track record for connecting these economic issues to justice issues, to the administration of justice, to having the resources to do things we really want to do. I have been, let me ask you this, but I think that's a very important thing. I don't think they did it well enough in the marketing for the graduated income. I think anytime you're talking about a justice issue and crime prevention, the elimination of poverty seems to me to be a pretty good way of addressing crime issues.
Yeah,
Illinois,
right.
never hear that.
Right. And in fairness, you probably don't hear it in a lot of places either. There are back happening in San Francisco to what the DA has done there in terms of reform. So it's unfortunately something that you have to battle against if you're in this space trying to do justice system reform work.
Yeah, I think we had Barry Friedman on our show. You were on our show earlier this year. Professor Barry Friedman from the Policing Project at NYU Law School talked about his frustration, how he was sick of being quiet about the fact that our legislatures, and in Chicago, that would be the city council, the Cook County board, and the Illinois General Assembly here, let us down, right? I think they let us down, or at least have. Let's not criticize this one currently, at least right now, but they have let us down for decades in this state as far as financially. I don't understand, like Rahm Emanuel closing 50 schools, Rahm Emanuel closing the mental health clinics. If you look back on that and you look back at the people serving the most underserved communities, they almost always voted for those things. I don't remember seeing a black or brown politician voting against the selling of the parking meters in Chicago, or blasting Rahm for closing the schools or closing the mental health clinics. I just didn't see that. And I think the progressive side of Chicago, the advocate side, reformer side, needs to do a better job of connecting those economic votes that these politicians make to the actual conditions in the communities.
Yeah, I think that's right. There are so many issues we just sort of accept at face value. You pick an issue like TIF, that provides funding for development in neighborhoods where, the incomes and the tax increment supports it. We just say, well, that's how it is. Some areas get money, some don't, and we don't think about the ways we can be, generating revenue, generating dollars to invest in things like economic development, workforce development, all these things that we know are root cause problems that affect our crime rates and the jail and prison cycles.
Right. For those who don't know, Dr. Cooper here was the co-author of A War on Neighborhoods, which is an excellent read that I recommend everyone check out. But he was also one of the researchers involved, or the lead researcher, I'm not exactly sure, of a website called Chicago $1 Million Blocks. And that's a website that I also recommend everyone check out because it's fascinating look at how much money Illinois spends incarcerating people per block in Chicago, at least for a snapshot of time. I think 2005 to 2009, was that the data? Because I know the data was opened by CJP, but I think that's the snapshot of time we had, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit old now, but I mean, without, the work of Chicago Justice Project, you guys obviously, we couldn't do that sort of project. And I think, maybe prison sentences have gone down a little bit since then, but it's still reflective of how much money we're committing to spend to lock people up. So it really is an investment in those neighborhoods, but in removing people and sending them elsewhere. It's an investment in jobs and infrastructure downstate.
There it is.
For housing people removed from the west side. There you go. Just looking at the west side, the left of the screen there, all those blocks with over $1 million committed to be spending on locking people up over the life of those sentences.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. If it should be something taught in Chicago public schools. It should be something that legislators in each of those districts, either on the state level or on the county level and on the city level, should have to answer for. Because there's a never ending, and it's the tough on crime issue that we're constantly faced with, right? And you constantly get aldermen that quote unquote aldermen that think they're progressive, and I'm not sure what that is anymore in Chicago, because I remember at one point Joe Moore was progressive, but like Alderman Leslie Harrison, depending on the day, she's either espousing some really progressive views or espousing really horrific criminal justice reviews. Like one time I remember a tweet, there was a crime in a park in her ward, and she was talking about how we need to like significantly increase the penalties for any crimes in parks. It's like,
yep. Yeah. I mean, I think what gives me hope is a lot of the younger guard, the up and coming aldermen. There are a handful of newly appointed or newly elected younger aldermen. And I feel like there's this wave of young people organizing. They get it, and they're not going to, just fall into the same old trap of saying, every time there's, a crime or an offense, lock them up. That people who are in prison who have a record should be ashamed of themselves. That's one thing you hear from politicians saying, like, there are too many criminal records on the street, And I feel like the new guard is saying, like, well, we know why there are too many people with criminal records on the streets, because we've screwed up in locking them up, right?
Yeah, it's not something to talk about. And it's very, unfortunately, I hope the younger guard is better. I think the youth and the generations previous to us are definitely much more progressive on a whole variety of issues. I don't have a whole lot of faith in our politicians. When I say I'm coming from DC, but I will not. There's any faith in the politicians here right now, as I'm equally distant a mile from both the White House and the Capitol, and everything around us is boarded up, pending whatever comes over the next couple of days. You can feel the tension here. So let's get to a couple of the races. So the first one we have a winner in is Iris Martinez, running for the Cook County Circuit Clerk's office. So I think the first time in 12 years, maybe even longer, we get a replacement at the clerk's office that runs the data to the court system. You think that's a positive for justice issues?
Good question. It's too early for me to tell, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, she sort of campaigned on, better data, better transparency. You know better than anyone that a lot of people pay lip service to that. So I think
Yep.
it's too soon to tell. Obviously, or honestly, I just don't know yet. But I think what is true is that so many organizations like yourself and Justice Watch, Invisible Institute, people who've been pushing for this and figuring out how to get data sources and releasing stories about it, I think, is what's sort of shifting the tide and, people releasing data in the first place, because as people figure out more ways to get a hold of it, whether it's through lawsuits or technological means, the more that it becomes irrelevant, or it becomes irrelevant to try to hold on to it. You sort of force the issue. So I'm less hopeful about in terms of who the candidate is, and more in terms of who the activists are working to release data. I think there's just been a great movement about that for 10 years, and you were sort of on the forefront of that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I agree with that. I will, just to provide some context to our viewers, I think Dan knows this already. We have an agreement with Cook County Circuit Court Chief Judge Timothy Evans to access criminal court case level data back to either 1980 or 1988. They weren't sure when they first started collecting it. So every piece of data they collected in the criminal court from the day they started collecting it through 2015 with mandatory updates. And we have been fighting for 5 years with Dorothy Brown's office, who was charging us $25,000 to de-identify the data. Right? She wants it. So it's like take out 3 fields and create a unique identifier. And they keep holding us this. I call it a corruption tax. And that to me would be. I couldn't even imagine what the impact of having that data open would do for research and for understanding how this court system works.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I voted today. I'm one of the few people who still sort of likes the tradition, the pomp and circumstance of the voting day. But, there are a lot of judges you're voting on, and it's hard for an average voter to figure out who should I be voting for, who should I retain as a circuit judge. And, the Injustice Watch, I think I mentioned them earlier, because they have done research on judges, release a scorecard, and they provide more sort of investigative journalism around which judges have been overly punitive or have had controversies. I think before this kind of journalism, like, you just didn't know. And, so if you're a voter, you say, sure, like, I don't see any reason not to retain this judge. But the more data that's released, you can dig in and say, okay, these judges are not friendly to justice system reform. They're overly harsh in different types of cases. And I think it's a game changer. As I understand it, a lot of judges, react and respond to, their grades on some of these scorecards, right? So they're scared by, what organizations are putting out about them. You get a hold of this data, and we can do all sorts of stuff and have complicated analysis of what judges are doing.
It was interesting. I agree with you. And before I get to a story, I just have to let everyone know and let you know, we've been in contact with the Martinez campaign and have approached them about removing the corruption tax. And we have a phone call on Friday to start moving that, hopefully during the transition. So there's the possibility that may become a reality soon. I never give it any hope under Dorothy Brown, but it's talking about judges. I can say it now because he's long retired, but I was sitting in Judge Beeble's chambers one day, and it was during the election time. And we're talking about, he's trying to he gets criticized for cases taking too long. And he's like, look at what these Democrats, these scumbags, and he's a Democrat himself, are sending me. And he pulls out the Daily Law Bulletin. Look at this guy. He is rated unfavorably by every single bar. He's black. He's unfavorable to the Cook County bar. Here's this guy, the next person, woman, guy, whatever it is, straight down the line, unfavorable across the board, unfavorable across the board, unfavorable across the board. He goes, they're backed by the Democratic Party. They're going to win. and somehow they're sending me these people, and they also expect me to get the courthouse operating more efficiently and better run when they're sending me people that are rated unfavorably across the board. And I was like, oh my God. But at the same time, like, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. Right. He would never speak out about a specific judge that was underneath him, but he did rail about the elections and the Cook County way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, think about how much control, one party has had. And I'm not saying Republicans would be any better, but just it's sort of a ticket controlled system, right? Rather than, you think about aldermen, you think about Senate candidates, House candidates, you have more information about what they do, and you can make an informed choice. Judges have always been this opaque thing. They're supported by the ticket. You tend to vote with who's supported. It's political who gets supported. It's not a very democratic way of doing things, democratic with a small d, right? And I think what more data does is democratize the process, give people something to choose, to sift through, right? And I think it used to not matter because most people wanted judges to be tough on crime, right? You think about the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, that was the case. And there's a different mood now. People are realizing the harm that mass incarceration is doing. And so, let's come up with better ways of analyzing data around what judges are doing with sentencing so we can have more choices, more power at the ballot.
Yeah, before the scorecards were available, either from I used to get them from the Chicago Council of Lawyers. Before those, I used to just vote to not retain all the judges. I don't know if that was good or bad, but I was, we were all flying by the seat of our pants then. There was no way to know what to do. And I certainly wasn't going to trust the party to do it. That was definitely not my... Okay, so let's get, at least currently from the Tribune, we have Cook County State's Attorney now catching up. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx is trailing by like 5% or 5,000 votes. What has been your review of her performance? And just for the viewers, yes, we filed suit against Kim Foxx 10 days ago. So that's out there. I just wanted to make that out there. Yeah, she's trailing by 5 right now. So what's your view of her first term?
I think she's done a good job. I think it's really hard to come into a role like that and immediately get everything right, turn the ship around in a very dramatic way. But I think in a fairly short period of time, she's reduced the number of people who have been sentenced to prison. I think that's a huge win for justice system reform. And I think there have been some missteps, no doubt. The Jussie Smollett case, I think, was a misstep. But by and large, I don't think, in my estimation, that takes away from the fact that she has been a reformer. She has started to do what she promised to do, which is reduce the number of people sentenced. And could she be doing more? Certainly. Should we be pushing her to do more? Absolutely. But by and large, I think she deserves another term to keep pushing on what she started.
All right. So one of the things that she has been big on pushing is bail reform. How do you think bail reform has rolled out in Cook County?
I mean, I think it's been slow to roll out. I think during the pandemic, things have been confusing. I think there's been a little bit of a hot potato game between, judges, the district attorney, the sheriff, in terms of how you get people out of the jail safely. But by and large, I think with, bail bond reform, we're moving in the right direction, right? I think it's happening. Good organizers, have been pushing on this for a number of years. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, so if you were going to be, basically, let me back up and say, we have basically been faced with, when bail reform has been rolled out, we've been faced with a version that Evans and Fox have been saying about how it's working. and anti-bail reform from the CPD, from the police union, and now from the mayor's office. Who of those sides, which side do you trust least?
That's a tough question. I'm going to opt out and just say I don't trust any narrative that tries to point the finger at, bail reform when all we're saying is if the person is wealthy enough, no matter what the crime, we're okay with them getting off. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's not equitable. It doesn't pass any common sense test. We're not talking about holding a person based on the severity of the crime. We're just talking about how much someone can afford to pay, right? I think certainly there are maybe some crimes, some circumstances where bond doesn't make sense, right? But I think those narratives are always fraught because they're based on fear mongering. We've cherry picked the data. We found 2 people who were released and went on to commit further crimes. And they never do a real analysis comparing apples to apples. How many, so I think I don't trust any narratives that point the finger at bail, right? Because if someone's eligible for bail, they should be able to get out whether they can afford it or not.
So are you, I will say I will do it without putting you in a corner to say it. I will say that I've been really disappointed, not shocked, but disappointed in the media coverage around bail reform. It's very much like he said, she said, or he said, he said, where they take the Fox and Evans version and they run a story with it. And then it seems like they're faced with like, oh my God, we got to run a story of the other side. And that would be Mayor Lightfoot and Superintendent Brown, the police union. And then they run their version instead of, in my opinion, doing their job and actually doing the data analysis and finding out who is actually telling the truth there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and also even when they do the data analysis, they don't do it accurately or fairly. There was an article, I think it was the Tribune. I'm trying to remember who over the summer had a big investigative piece where they looked at people who had been bailed out through the Chicago Community Bond Fund. And, it was sensational. They just used descriptive statistics and said X percentage of people, who made bail went on to commit further crimes without any comparison to what the baseline is for, what do recidivism like for the general population of people, irrespective of people who are bonded out, and so it's just sensational. It's garbage. It's junk science. And I think it plays to people's biggest fears, right? Because we've been doing this for decades. You let out so-and-so and they're dangerous. They went on to do X, Y, Z. It's just been a winning political scare tactic.
Yeah. Since Reagan, right, against Gary Hart, I forgot the guy's name. He let out someone early or on weekend furlough and he committed a murder. Oh, yeah. His name has become a verb now. Yes. No, I agree with you. Willie. Yeah, it's a Willie Horton. Yes. I think we talked about this on our regular show that airs, by the way, Wednesday, 12 to 1 p.m. Central Time, Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel, which tomorrow we have Tanya Woods from the Westside Justice Center on, talking about an open letter she signed on to Mayor Lightfoot, which I'm going to talk with Dan with it in a bit. No, I thought that article was the quintessential reason why journalism is so subpar to academic research. Yes, academic research takes longer, but this mere fact that they could just run a story by saying, here's a number with no context of the percentage of people that got rearrested who made bail on bail reform. So obviously it's horrible. I was just kind of aghast at the fact that they even could write that. Frank Mann in the Sun-Times, if people want to check out our Monday morning brief, it's on our website. Comes out every Monday, a review of the media content from the last week. Frank Mann in the Sun-Times had a story last week. Would you believe there was a gang shooting some time ago that 13 people were wounded. It was in the house. And would you believe that the gun, one of the guns used in that shooting, was bought by a straw purchaser from a gun store in Cook County? This was like huge news. And it's like, the U.S. Attorney's Office has had a program trying to interdict that called Project Safe Neighborhood for over 20 years. That's not news. I think a lot of our problems around our justice system and reform and advocacy and getting to where we want with our justice system lays at the feet of journalists and our media companies. Just misreporting, bad reporting. I'm really sick and tired of Fran Spielman's back and forth with everyone lambasting someone with a quote, and all of a sudden it's a story. But all right, I'm going to move on to other races. I just want to check. Yeah, Kim Foxx has moved up now as more votes come in. She's up about 90,000 votes. So I think that's what we were both kind of expecting that to happen.
Yeah, I would have been very surprised if she was behind for long.
Yeah, and I do agree with you on her. While we are suing her, and I'll make no bones about the fact that I don't think she's been anywhere near as transparent, and she breached a settlement agreement with us. I agree with most things. Is that I think by and large she's done what's needed to be done. By and large, in the office, as far as making decisions about prosecuting and who to prosecute. I think it was a great idea to not prosecute people arrested for retail theft, for felony retail theft, unless it's over $1,000. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that needs to be commended. I know she took a lot of flack about it, but I worked in retail and I was involved in cases where people stole from us. One case resulted in a prosecution. And after I left the courthouse, I told the stage attorney, I'm like, don't ever, and the cop, I'm like, we're never calling you ever again. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, this is a complete waste of time. I'm in the business world. You were supposed to help us get our merchandise back. Him getting prosecuted is absolutely meaningless to us. All I did was waste 3 days. So not only did I lose the merchandise, but now I wasted 3 days of work where I could have been working, sitting in this courtroom. I don't understand what good that did us.
Right. And I mean, it doesn't do anybody any good because, we know the chances increase that someone's going to get locked up over a number of those offenses that, they're not going to have a good outcome. They're not going to be rehabilitated. They're going to come back at a disadvantage, have a more difficult time getting employed and potentially just setting themselves up for a life of, incarcerated. Right.
Yeah, it's awful. We pay for it. Their lives just get worse. It makes absolutely no sense any way, shape, or form. Okay, I want your opinion, youth advocate as you are and have been in your work, the retention of Judge Tooman. It came out, and I wrote in our Monday meeting brief, it seemed punitive. Tony Preckwinkle, head of the Democratic Party, recommended that he's not, for him not to be retained. And the Democrats kind of fell in line. And I'm like, wow, that seems very political, because I think he was the judge that okayed the special prosecutor against Kim Foxx in the Smollett case, which I got to say I think is kind of a joke, even though I'm suing Kim at the moment. Do you have an opinion either way about that? Because I know after it came out, like in subsequent news stories, it came out with, I've seen on social media, a bunch of youth advocates. Because I think he sat over the court. I'm not going to say youth court, but that's the wrong way to say it. But I think he dealt with juveniles. And
as I understand it, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sure you know better than I do. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as I understand it, yeah, he was at one point. There was something he was behind, essentially arguing that juvenile youth should be incarcerated even during the pandemic. So he, as I understand it, was a roadblock for youth being released, right? So
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, that's I think there's been a lot of it. It's not just this judge. There's been a sentiment early on, a big sort of undercurrent of people pushing to not release people in jails and prisons, right? Saying potentially that, they're too dangerous to be released, or they're gonna spread COVID, as if keeping people locked up essentially on a cruise ship where they're more likely to get COVID is a better alternative. So yeah, I mean, I think that those sorts of decisions are a travesty, and there should be accountability for that.
Okay, that's good. I did not know much about Judge Tumen actually until this all hit the press. And I think like a lot of people just assumed it was retribution rather than him actually deserving it. And it does seem in the long run now, in the bigger picture, I should say, that he deserved not to be retained. I don't think we have numbers on the courts yet, unfortunately. So while we wait for some more votes to, yeah. Unfortunately, that's what we're going to have to wait for. I am going to check. Yeah, they're not reporting anything yet on his case, on his case, on his election. Yeah, it's not a case at all. All right, I want to get your. We're going to go into a couple criminal justice issues that are hotbeds right now. At least they are to me. Have you seen that Chicago is going to try? They're going to run a trial in 2021, supposedly, on a co-responder model, is what they're calling it, where they're going to team up, I think, a mental health specialist with a police officer showing up to calls where there's someone in mental health distress. And, well, first of all, let me get your feelings on that first before I go off and spout my own.
I honestly don't know enough about it to really give you an in-depth opinion. As I understand it, like the intentions are good, right? At least we're giving some nod to the importance of mental health, but I should ask you your opinion, because I think you've obviously thought about it more than I
have. We have interns now, so for the audience, and we'll be talking about it on our main show at some point in the near future, and I'm trying to get someone from the program. There's a program in Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, called Cahoots. CAHOOTS. And as far as I know, it's been going for many, 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 many years. And they basically, now I disagree that it goes through the same dispatch, but it goes through the same 911. But that dispatcher is supposedly going to be trained if there's not violence. They actually dispatch a separate, completely separate system called Cahoots, which pits either a paramedic and a mental health specialist or social worker, or a nurse and a mental health social worker person. And they show up, and no one with a gun shows up.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, that's 100 times better than, sending somebody, on. And I can give an anecdote here that you'll appreciate, because you've gone to the academy, you've seen the facilities, you've thought about the training. Yep. I was at a demonstration once at the police academy. An officer was nice enough to talk to our group and give us a presentation about how the police go about making arrests, how they use body cameras, how they use force, tasers, etc. And after explaining how and when they use a taser, they asked if anyone wants to volunteer to role play the officer. And so I raised my hand and I said, me, and so I was given a gun, a training gun, and it said, here's the scenario. You received a call about a domestic dispute from a person who has known mental health issues. He's on the corner yelling and threatening to harm people. And that's the information you got up, so you're rolling up on the scene. And the officer was role-playing the person who had the police called on him. So I came up and tried to de-escalate as I'm role-playing, just saying, what's going on here? And the guy's screaming at me. And I'm trying to ask him his name and be calm and de-escalate. And eventually he kept walking toward me and sort of swearing at me. And then he stopped the exercise and he said, do you guys see what he did wrong? And I said, what do you mean? What did I do wrong? He's like, I was walking towards you and my fists were balled up and you didn't pull out your taser or your gun and establish control of the situation. And I'm arguing, I'm saying like, well, actually, don't we want to de-escalate? Didn't the call say this is just somebody who's got mental health issues? And the argument was no, because if he punches you and knocks you out, he's going to take your weapon. So you need to establish control at all times. And if he's threatening you, balling up his fists, yelling at you, you're not in control of the situation, right? So that's the mentality. No matter who it is, establish control. So having a mental health advocate in that situation to de-escalate would have been amazing, right? So it makes me hopeful.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So yes, I agree. I just think that the problem with you having to, without the gun, if you don't have the gun, then your need to defend yourself from him stealing your gun is much less.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And the police, and I don't think that critics of the police, especially from the left, understand this. It's like they do have to worry about someone getting their gun and what they'll do with it. And I think police think if someone gets their gun, they're dead. They will just shoot and kill them. And I don't think that's entirely unreasonable, but I do think that maybe it's an opportunity to rethink where we need the gun to be. Right? Like, I don't understand. I think, let me just second say, I think Lightfoot is totally soft pedaling this inappropriately. Cahoots has been around a very long time. There is more than enough evidence and research to show what's worked, what hasn't worked. And I don't think we need to try a program for a year or two in Chicago before we actually roll something out if we ever do full scale in the city. This isn't something that hasn't been done before. So like, great, Lori, thank you for taking that half step. We appreciate it. But it's 2020 moving on to 2021. When are we going to have the 5 steps we need?
I
that's
hear
my
you,
view,
but I guess, finding myself not trying to defend, but, when have these institutions ever moved quickly, drastically, radically, right? I think in all justice system reform efforts, they're always slow. Or tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're 100% correct. But that's because because we leave it up to the justice system agencies themselves.
Yeah.
And that's a fail. That's a fail.
Yep.
You don't want, and this is, we're working, trying to, with some interns, work on a legislative agenda for the city of Chicago. If you don't, let's take some incidents. If you don't want the police department kneeling on someone's neck, make it a felony. Don't ask them to put a policy and then please follow it. Make it a felony. You don't, in New York with Eric Garner, when they choked him out, you don't want them to use that chokehold, make it a felony. I think our legislators got to step up and start taking control. And I helped create the back end system of Chicago has. I helped create COPA and the Deputy Inspector General of Public Safety's office. I helped reform or adjust how the police board operates. And all of that, in my opinion, has been a failure. It doesn't mean the people are working hard. They're just not going to do what we need them to do. And we need our legislators and our elected officials to step up and force them. I'm aggravated to hell that I'm hearing from Lori Lightfoot and others. We're working on this consent decree, and we're just going to work the process. We live in a democracy. Why does the police department get the 10 years to decide whether or not to keep data in a certain way?
Yeah, and I think what you raise is, another problem with that is a new administration comes in that's more friendly to, the police. They can just toss all the recommendations, right? That is a problem with slow walking it. I hear you.
Right, and I think you put it in legislation, and then you make the next administration that comes in try to get it out of the legislation. I hope to be contacting the governor's office because I think the same thing I think it needs to be statewide. The Illinois General Assembly needs to step up and do their job. We don't need to wait and ask them, please, can you keep this data? Can you keep it this way? Can you do this? Can you train officers? And let's just jump to that. There was I'm not sure if you saw this leading up to today, they're worried about unrest in the cities. David Brown, the superintendent of Chicago Police Department, released a press release, and I have it on my phone, talking about how the Chicago Police Department, the officers, they got First Amendment training. It is 2020. How do officers of the Chicago Police Department, why do they need more First Amendment training? Shouldn't they have it by now? This isn't the 60s.
You would think.
It's 50 plus years from Vietnam and the protests, and we're still trying to train officers on First Amendments. I couldn't believe he put that down on paper. That, to me, that should have been the headline in the Tribune. 50 years after Vietnam protest, the police department is still trying to train officers on First Amendment issues.
1968 Grant Park was not bad enough.
That's 52 years ago.
Yep.
Right? 52 years ago, and we're still trying to train them. That just, I saw that. I get their press releases, and my mouth opened, and I thought for sure there would be an article in the paper about it. There wasn't. If there was an article about it, I'm sure it was positive about how they're being, the department's training them to be respectful of the protests. Okay, I want to move to defunding the police real quick. One second. I want to just check the race real quick to see if there's anything has happened. She's up 170,000 votes. I think we can say that what 90% of the vote counted, that Kim Foxx has won re-election. That seems to be a pretty easy call there. And I went to the wrong room. And the graduated income tax is down 19,000. With it's only 40. That's only 49% of the vote, so it's got a bit, but it may not pass. I thought for sure, in the way the state was going, that would pass pretty easily.
I was less hopeful. I was hearing the last couple of weeks that it wasn't, that it was right on the bubble. So I'll be surprised if it does pass, but we'll see.
I think that's bad for the state. I think people are going to be destroyed when they see all their taxes skyrocket.
Yep.
Okay, defunding the Chicago Police Department. Lori Lightfoot mentioned time and again about how she's against defunding, which I have been critical of her, critical of that decision. But yet she's considering the elimination of 600 positions within the department that are currently empty. Isn't that somehow defunding, or am I missing something?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw that too in the budget. Thought it was curious as well. I don't know. I can only speculate that, maybe there's a political calculation that I want to be on record. I don't want to be on record. Since I'm in a national spotlight, I'm on the headlines of Fox News on their webpage, all over the earth, on and on and on. So I don't want to give them more fodder, and it's just slowly pivoting toward a little bit of reform. Maybe that's a generous interpretation. I'm not sure, but I think advocates see this as the moment to get it done and want it done now. I think politicians, there aren't a lot of politicians who are coming out in support of it. And I think in fairness, there's probably a calculated reason not to, because we still live in a society where you're so easily beaten up for being, quote, weak on crime, right? And I think especially since there have been some high profile, incidents of violence and looting, that you don't necessarily want to do anything that puts you in the headlines and says, we link looting with defunding the police. Because you talked about defunding the police, there's more looting. So I'm a little bit sympathetic to a politician who isn't immediately on board. That doesn't mean that myself as an advocate and others should be pushing further. I have been very disappointed with a lot of the things the administration has done with protests this summer, closing down public transportation, opening the bridges. I think that puts people who need to use public transportation stranded, right? I don't think that the response to our protests and civil unrest is doubling down on punitive measures. So I think that's been disappointing. And then in the budget, the cutting of 600 positions, I'm not sure what to make of it yet. It could just be like, this is our fiscal reality and we're looking for cuts everywhere, or maybe it's a behind the scenes signal of some support for shifting funds away from policing.
Yeah, I agree with you to an extent about I don't know exactly what to make of it. If I do think I am a little worried that it is like a defunding by stealth, as I have called it. My problem would be is like if you're going to do defunding, then that reduction has to be tied to the creation of other services, right? Like stand up, mental health services, drug treatment services, different responses with that money. Now, I will say that I am sure the city and the state are going to face 2021 is going to be falling off a cliff financially for both. And if we don't get the fair tax passed, which is still up now, it's up 40,000 votes. That's a big problem. I think so. I can understand it from that thing. I think I do attribute the follow-up protests and the follow-up civil unrest in the city to some degree at the feet of the mayor by not immediately in the first round of protest coming out and at least saying she would engage in the city in a discourse about what defunding might look like.
Yeah.
And bringing those interests into a process, right? Let's not forget, everyone, Mayor Lightfoot was head of the Police Accountability Task Force, Lightfoot, who had no problem dropping bombs on Rahm for everything she disagreed with, he said. And she was also head of the police board, Lightfoot. And I think she would have been lobbing grenades from wherever she was at Rahm Emanuel had Rahm Emanuel done that. So I do agree with you that I'm sure there's segments of the city that would not like to hear things were being defunded. But I'm a little worried. I just think that was a calculated mistake in the beginning.
There's nothing wrong with the discourse. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. What do we mean by defunding? How do we do it? What are we shifting funds to? That's a dialogue, and we should be having those conversations, right? But I think, we live in such a polarized 30-second soundbite world where you don't get to have those rich discussions. You hear, oh, so-and-so wants to just abolish the police, right? So we need to bring more thoughtfulness into the dialogue across the board.
Right.
I don't have any hope that that's going to happen, but.
No, I don't either, but I think, I've heard a lot of criticism by people that saying the marchers were just like, they're out of their minds, right? The protesters by talking about defunding, and they should have had a more focused strategy. And I'm like, no, that's not what protests are, my friend. Right. I think by having that discussion, she could have really focused the discourse, brought those people in, and made them think they were being, their concerns were being responded to. I also think if we're going to bring that whole thing up with the protest, not immediately taking down the statues of Christopher Columbus boggled my mind. I mean, when Columbus, Ohio is taking down the Christopher Columbus's statues before we are in Chicago, I don't understand. And it was a focal point for protests and violence. She should have done that earlier too. Okay, so one last thing before I let you go, and you can sweat out all these results by yourself. I'm not sure if anything has come up with our presidential. Nothing new since we started. Trump's leading Texas. That ain't wonderful. For us now, it's early still in that state. I want to get your feelings on a quote from Superintendent Brown. I'm not sure if you saw this, but Brown was addressing, I guess, a new class of cadets into the police academy. And he said, we basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically, we know that we screened you and we know you came from good homes where you were taught the difference between right and wrong, which is good because you're not going to get taught that here. And I was like,
yeah, I think
did he?
Nobody in the justice system should ever be the ones talking about making judgment on who's coming from a good home or not a good home. I think what it does is it normalizes good, meaning a house that's untouched by the justice system, when we know the justice system is inequitable, disproportionately impacts, people of color. So yeah, that kind of stuff has no place in my mind. It's an old trope of, blaming violence on bad fathers, for example, bad mothers. It's an iteration of the welfare queen trope that we heard from Ronald Reagan is what it is, right? So that's a problem.
Yeah, that got me, and the fact that they wouldn't be teaching them in the police academy the difference between right and wrong. It would seem to me that the academy, like a lot of policing or a certain percentage of policing, is a gray line. And they need to make sure you're on the right side of the gray line, like using force, whether you throw that extra punch, how you make decisions, how you judge people off the bat. I was just kind of shocked that he said the whole thing, and that it didn't really.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, there are other chiefs of police, superintendents, in other places that are providing leadership on this. That, as I understand it, in Wisconsin, the superintendent or chief in Madison, for example, and maybe Milwaukee, if I'm remembering right, have come out and said, "Hey, look, we acknowledge problems in the past and the systemic structural racism and bias in the criminal justice system and in policing, and we want to acknowledge that and work to change it." Right? It would be nice to hear that kind of rhetoric coming out of Chicago rather than the circling the wagons, which is what we typically get, right?
Yeah, or it's circling the wagons. It's double speak. I am. Yeah, I mean Brown is not that. I don't know who I was expecting Lori Lightfoot's first superintendent to be, but Brown is not. He's not taking us anywhere near the promised land, whatever that is. He just seems a Dallas version of what we've had in that office for 100 years.
Amen.
Which isn't very good. It's not good either. Let me just check real quick. So no, there's nothing big on left of the elections. I think, unfortunately for our Judge Tooman people, I was interested to see what happens in that race. We're going to have to wait. And it says the graduated income tax or fair tax is down 43,000 votes. Kim Foxx is moving in without a problem. Iris Martinez is in without a problem. Not shocking in Cook County. And we'll have to wait to see, at least till the morning, to see Judge Tooman's fate. My bet is he wins. It's very hard to get out a judge here. All right. Mr. Cooper, I really appreciate your time and jumping on with us today. Hopefully we'll be in a good place in the morning. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 12 hours.
Let's hope. Be safe out there. Good to see you.
You too, my friend. Chatting. You too, brother.
All right. Have a good night.
Take it easy, man. You too.